good morning and welcome to our next mentorship session on meat alternatives and plant-based foods. My name is Nicole Gallace and I'm a talent solutions manager with FoodGrads and also a recruiter with DeLacy. FoodGrads is a program delivery partner of CareersNOW. CareersNOW is Food and Beverage Ontario's workforce development initiative. So thank you for joining us today. And I have a special guest with me today, Lara from Protein Industries Canada. I will let you introduce yourself. I'd love to hear, how did you get into this industry? A little bit about your job today, what you're currently doing with Protein Industries, and then we'll dive into meat alternatives and plant-based foods.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks for the invitation. Happy to be here today, and I hope we have a productive conversation. So my name is Lara Lima, as Nicole said. I am a program manager at Protein Industries Canada. I've been with the company for it's going to be 2 years at the beginning of the year, so for a little bit now. I guess I'll start from the start. So I did get into food science in my bachelor's degree. I am originally from Brazil, so that is where I did my bachelor's. And actually there, our focus is mostly on food engineering and I think less on food science. Ultimately very similar degrees, but just kind of our focus was more, processing machinery and slightly less on maybe the chemistry of food. So I did food engineering. Why I got into that, maybe I guess it's a question on its own, but I'll go into the career and we can dive into any specific points. Then I was exposed to kind of what R&D, what research and development was pretty early on in my student life. I got to I was an intern at a candy company, which was a very, very fun first internship. And I was in their R&D department, and I really liked that I could be creative at my job. So, being creative is something that I like. And I saw in research and development an opportunity to kind of use that creativity. So then I did part of my bachelor's in France, which gave me a new perspective on, I think, just general ag rather than processing. Like I said, my degree was very processing focused. So that was a great experience that I had. And I went back to Brazil to finish my degree, knowing that I wanted to go back to Europe to kind of specialize myself a little bit more on that R&D piece that I mentioned earlier that I really enjoyed. So I decided to pursue a master's degree in Wageningen University. If you folks are listening to this and you don't know about Wageningen University, you should. So go after, see some of their work. They're an amazing university. They're generally one of the top universities in the world for food and ag. So I was lucky enough to go and pursue a master's degree there, and I chose a very specific program, and that was the program that I wanted, which had two really interesting aspects of it for me. One is that we got to travel to different countries and different universities to do our coursework in the master's. So, we started off in the Netherlands. That's where Wageningen is. Then we went to Paris. We went to Ireland. We went to Sweden. There was a little bit of COVID disruption there. But anyways, and we got to kind of experience different universities, which was very cool. And then the second really awesome aspect of this master's is that we got to do our thesis in a company. So we were not in the university lab. It was actually an applied project, which for me as an experiential learner, I like to learn as I do things, was a very good way to kind of go into doing that master thesis and kind of doing that science project. So at that point, I got the chance to go to one of the Nestle research centers in Switzerland to do my master thesis work. I was there for almost a year in their protein department. And I was working with plant-based beverages, plant-based milks, which was kind of my starting point in the plant-based career, I'd say. I really fell in love with it. It was beyond a job. As a consumer and as a vegetarian myself, that's kind of what I lived and breathed. So it was a great experience. We did a lot of work there with pulses and oil seeds to make better, sensory pleasing and stable drinks. So after this experience in Nestle, I moved to Sweden because I got a job opportunity there at a startup. And I moved from, liquid based to call it solid matters, working with extrusion on salmon analogs. Um, it was again super interesting. It was a very different experience than what I had at Nestle. All of a sudden I was in a startup, and you have to again be creative with your resources because you don't have them all available to you. And doing this really hard product. If you've ever tried to make plant-based salmon, you know what I'm talking about. So I stayed there for a little while, and then just personally kind of decided to make the shift to Canada. So then I moved from Europe to Canada. Um, and here in my first year in Canada, I kind of, I'll say I paused my plant-based work, but I was still working with something that was very close to my heart. I started working with food waste for a company in Toronto. They're not for profit called Second Harvest. I don't know if you guys talked to them before. And so I was leading this national project on. They have an app where stores will sign up, and the whole point is that they'll donate food that's still good to people in need. And so that was a very cool project. I always liked plant-based because of the sustainability aspect of it, so this was still something that was very close to my heart. And then I came across Protein Industries Canada, or PIC, if you want to call them that. And PIC it was very fascinating when I learned about them. So they're one of the 5 innovation superclusters from the government of Canada, and they've received some funds from ISED to invest in innovation projects in the plant-based food space. If you look at the innovation superclusters, there's other programs out there that focus on different things. Our focus is plant-based proteins. And so I work with tons of companies all across Canada that are wanting to do innovation projects with us, and I'll help them, navigate through our programs, but also kind of navigate through projects, collaborations. Our projects are always collaborative. We'll help them connect with companies that maybe have something that they need, or an expertise that could be, complementary to what they have. Anyway, so it's a lot of kind of guiding the companies through and helping them to manage those projects. And then obviously, once the projects come to fruition and get that funding, we'll kind of work with them to see if they're actually accomplishing the goals that they've set up from the start. And that's what I'm doing today. I love it, but I still have many, many years to go in my career, but I guess I'll leave it at that, Nicole, and then we can go into any of those.
Yeah. So the companies that you work with, are they startups? Are they entrepreneurs, or is it a range?
It's a range. We do have a requirement that at least one SME has to join our projects. We always work with startups, but we also work with very, very big companies that are collaborating with small companies in our project. So yeah, we'll see a little bit of everything, really.
Mm-hmm. So your day to day, I know one of the biggest questions we get is, when you see that your title program manager. So tell us like a little bit. You sort of touched on it, but what's a typical day look like for you?
Yeah. So I do work remote. So I guess that explains a little bit of my routine. Since we're doing projects, with the whole country, I am, meeting with companies a lot of times from my computer at home. So I'll be talking to companies about, project ideas and kind of helping develop the project ideas from the start. Sometimes when the companies have kind of gotten their project ideas and their proposal outline, I'm always reviewing a lot of documents and kind of giving them feedback on what are the points that can be improved. I sometimes will visit the companies to kind of better understand what the technology is, what it is that they're proposing to do, or even after the funding takes place, just kind of understanding that the work that they're doing, almost like vetting the work that they're doing and making sure that everything is going accordingly. Sometimes I'll go to events and we'll kind of try to find new companies to do new projects. There's a little bit of recruiting that goes on. But yeah, a lot of things, but most of the time
Lots
I'm
of
sitting in
moving
front of my
parts.
computer.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and so would you help connect, I guess, some of these companies, certainly smaller organizations don't obviously have people in-house to do a lot of pieces. So I guess you're that bit of a connector too of different resources for them.
Yeah, we do get a lot of companies that are, they're seeking a new ingredient and they don't know where to find it, or they want to do a project with us. But like I said, there's always the collaboration aspect, and they want to find a company that kind of does or that does something that can contribute to their idea. And so we're always trying to match companies. We'll
Mm-hmm.
do our best. We also have a membership program where companies can kind of come in, and there's like a database of members that they can directly connect themselves with. So that's also a tool. But we'll do our best to connect companies that need some sort of expertise.
Awesome, awesome. If you don't mind, I'd love to dive into a little bit more about why you chose food science. It's one of those questions. I've been leading FoodGrads for quite a few years now, and I started FoodGrads because I definitely saw a gap with regards to young people that were interested to join the food and beverage processing sector, as I've been recruiting in the industry for years, but definitely saw less and less younger people sort of excited to join the food industry, unless they were in food science. That's the entry point, unless they'd already decided, certainly at the school level. And I even have stories of people that were in a different major, general science or biology or something, and then didn't realize food science was even a program at the school they were in, and then they changed to do food science as a major. So yeah, I'd love to learn sort of what inspired you.
Yeah. Um, So, so a lot of times, when I don't know, when I'm sitting in a plane and someone asks me, "Hey, what do you do?" and I say, "Oh, I work with food," and people find it super fascinating. And I think that's kind of what got me into it from the first place.
Mm,
My local university where I come from in Brazil doesn't have food science, and so I was looking, across the country, kind of what were the courses or what were the programs that I wasn't familiar with, because I really wanted to explore all of my options. And I came across, like I said, food engineering, because that's most of our food science. It's always a food engineering course in Brazil. Um, and I was pretty fascinated. I think, like those people that are sitting by me on the plane and they go, "Wait, what? Like food science? You can actually study this?" Um, and so I think honestly, my first instinct to kind of finding it interesting was, I was always a foodie. I always liked to explore food, and I was just fascinated by being able to understand a bit more how our food is produced. Um, and then the second factor, I love math, and like I said, our food engineering degree is pretty, calculus heavy, physics, chemistry, and so I felt like it was a program that I was gonna enjoy, and then afterwards it was gonna be a career that I would enjoy.
mm,
But yeah, that's kind of how that came to be. I liked what the program had to offer. I remember I did go after, and I think this what you're doing here with food grads is great, because I did go after information on, like, what does this career look like, and what it is that I can do in the future. And that's kind of how I reached that conclusion that, it was going to be a profession that I would like. So
mm.
um yeah, that's how it came to be.
And it's just not really, I think at the high school level, when you are kind of figuring out what school to go to, the food industry is not top of mind at that sort of point in young people's, the timing of things. So we are
Yeah.
trying to do some work there to sort of introduce the food industry as an option earlier, so that they young people can choose the programs that will guide them into a career in the industry. So it's always lovely to hear the inspiring stories, though, of why you people that are in the industry like yourself
Yeah.
chose it.
Yeah, I think it's funny, right? Because we're in contact with food every day, and we will continue to do so. Some people, when they look back at the pandemic and they think about, like, the necessary jobs, the folks that were still going to work every day, like I was one of them because we still need
Yeah.
to eat. And so it's something that almost should be more considered, or not should be organically more considered, because we're going to the supermarket every day, but somehow, yeah, folks don't consider it.
Don't
But
realize.
I'm glad I did.
Yes, absolutely, and I agree with you. Even when I do go out at the secondary age, when I talk to school children, they will say, if I say, tell me some jobs in the food processing space, and they'll say farmer or chef, and they don't even think about the jobs in between. So I think there's a lot of work to do,
Yeah.
but it's good timing to just sort of have these conversations. And I agree with you 100% about COVID. You know, and even any recession, food isn't going to go away. Even with technology, it's not going to go away. And I remember back in 2008 when I was recruiting, a lot of my other colleagues, their businesses sort of suffered a little bit because of the recession. But I found, because I focused in food processing, that some of my clients suffered a little bit. Like they're more luxurious brands, for example, but they're more affordable brands were skyrocketing. So it's like, you know, it's recession proof almost, and certainly pandemic proof, because we were saying through the pandemic, you know, these are our food heroes. You know, the heroes emerged, didn't they? Who we truly rely on through the pandemic, I think, and the cream rose to the top, and it was, you know, the food industry was right there. When I was lucky enough to reverse into my parking spot at the grocery store and have people put food in the trunk of my car, and it's like, you know, there's people that had to get the food here and make it prior to the grocery store. So I think, you know, there's a lot of work to do to sort of celebrate the industry and the people in the industry and what they do. So I thank you for your, you know, your part in the industry and what you do as a food scientist. And you mentioned food waste when you were working with Second Harvest. So that kind of brings me to my next question on how plant-based foods contribute to environmental sustainability compared to the traditional meat production.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think sustainability, you know, was the factor that made us see this boom in plant-based. I think it's great that consumers are wanting to know a little bit more where their food is coming from and how their food is processed. I think that's I think we should have been doing that a long time before we have. So I think that's great. You know, I can mention some numbers here, but, you know, please understand that those are kind of general numbers. If you look into the ingredient processing or specific products or specific even meat products, like those will vary. But one that I like to touch on is land use. You know, I think over 70% of our land is used for raising animals that will turn into food, and maybe less than 20% of that is actual what turns into food. So, you know, how efficient or how sustainable is it for us to use so much land to not produce so much food? And you know, there's the sustainability effect when we're talking about, you know, greenhouse gases emissions, but also sustainability in the sense of like, how future proof is that? You know, how much can we sustain that for just kind of the future of our diets? There's water usage. You know, again, there's a lot of studies that show that plant-based foods do use, you know, I think 70% at least less water than some of the conventional meat production. Greenhouse gases emissions, we know that some of the normal traditional meat products do emit more greenhouse gases than the plant-based does. And then you could go into the specific crops. Some of the pulseless crops are nitrogen fixing, and so they're actually good for the environment. You know, again, there's so much work being done on life cycle assessments and assessing the individual products and kind of how do they compare to their counterpart. But these are just, I think, some general figures as to how this is more sustainable, and I'm not even going into, you know, antibiotics and antibiotics resistance and just kind of or microplastics. Some of the folks that are working in the plant-based fish or plant-based seafood products, they'll touch upon on the microplastics topics. And so it's not even going into those that are more maybe I don't know if philosophical or less related to our land or greenhouse gases emissions, which is normally what we associate with sustainability. But certainly there's still work to be done within the plant-based food industry to reduce that waste or to upcycle more products, or to reduce water usage and energy usage, because it still does use some of our natural resources, right? So I'm not saying it's a completely 100% sustainable process as of today, but I think it is an improvement to what we've seen in the conventional meat sector.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. So what would you say are some of the challenges that you see in developing plant-based products over the
Yeah,
meat-based?
there are a lot, and I don't see that
Because
necessarily as
people
a
still want the meat, right? Is that what you see, or not really? I guess that's another
yeah.
question in there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think meat will be around, and I don't think well, my personal opinion is, I think it's a great option to have it. You don't necessarily need to replace all of your meat. I chose to do so, but I completely respect folks that don't, and I think meat will stay here. It's a cultural part of our diets. Like, I every time I go back home, and if you've ever been to Brazil or heard about Brazil, like, we're giant meat producer, and I grew up eating meat, until I chose to stop, but my whole family does, and I can't imagine our culture without that association to a meat. So I think it's
Mm.
beyond like a food that's nourishing us. It's part of our culture, it's part of our philosophy. So I think it has great aspects to it, and this is not at all a critique to the meat market. um, but I guess back to your question on product development, there are lots of challenges. It's a new market, and these are new developments. I think,
Mm.
but I see those challenges as opportunities. So I'll use the word opportunity. I think there's so much opportunity within the plant-based food space, to improve some of these products. A few that I can mention, flavor is one of them. It's, having worked with salmon, a plant-based salmon in the past, like, it is so hard to mimic that, buttery, sweet but acidic notes that salmon naturally has, and that we don't really think about those flavor notes when we are eating our salmon. We just know that that's what it tastes and that's what it feels like. So flavor is definitely a challenge, I think, mimicking and making it, flavor, mouthfeel, making it look and taste like that product. There are good advancements and good technologies that are being created to kind of handle that, but we still got a ways to go with flavor. Um, what else? Texture is another one. If you think about meat, you know, meat was once muscle. It's like this naturally occurring, thing that we have, or that animals have in their bodies, that turns into this products that we eat. And when we're making plant-based food products, we're trying to create a fibrous structure. So
Mm.
you go to a lab, and you're working with an extruder. You're inserting these, powders. If I'll, not talking any scientific terms, but you're putting these powders and water into this machine that will then create this fibrous structure. Like, it's so hard for you to, I'll say, artificially create a naturally, and a structure that mimics a naturally occurring structure. So
Mm.
texture is definitely a challenge. The cookability of some of these products, we'll get a lot of products in the market that are soft. You cook them, and they're going to be too soft because they lose that fibrous structure. So I think that's another one where we'll have some work to do. um, yeah, I could go on and on. Maybe I'll just mention one more that, I think is a prohibiting factor today to more people trying meat products, which is price. I
Mm.
think we go into the stores, and we see meat products that are maybe beyond what we want to pay for them. Um, and that's a problem that's going to be solved when there is more scaling, and when there is more investment in the sector, and that is part of what Protein Industries, and other companies out there are doing.
Mm.
So I think a lot of opportunities to improve the products, but I think we are, you know we're doing a lot of work to get there and to kind of touch on those challenges or opportunities.
Yeah. You mentioned about the ingredients. How do you source and select ingredients used in meat alternatives?
Yeah, so it depends, right? It depends what you're trying to do. Um, I think so. I think first it's what is the functionality of a specific protein that you're trying to use. We'll look at some of, like, for instance, the egg replacement products out there in the
Yeah.
market. There a lot of them are using mung protein because it has that specific gelling functionality that is required to make that egg alternative actually resemble egg. And so you're targeting a specific protein because it has a specific functionality. Who is your target market? Like, who is this product for? A lot of the meat alternatives in the market are gluten. The main protein that's giving them that structure is gluten. Are you targeting a gluten-free market? And then you're already excluding a protein source right there because that's not the market you're trying to hit. Sometimes you're going with, this is a local product and you want to be able to source your protein locally. So, you're looking at Canada, for instance. Maybe I'm going to use pea because Canada produces tons of pea, or canola protein, or lentils, fava protein. So I think geography is also an interesting factor to consider. Cost, I'll get a lot of companies that maybe want to work with a super functional and super pure protein, but it's cost prohibitive. So I, it seems like I'm not answering the questions, but I think it depends on so many factors, and I think it depends really on the product that you're trying to do. But ultimately, you're kind of putting back together the protein, fat, and fiber components that is naturally, again, kind of naturally occurring in that meat, a conventional meat product.
What would you say to those that are concerned or you hear the alternatives are highly processed? And I know that process, the word in and of itself, gets a lot of bad attention. People are like, stay away from ultra processed, and I understand that, the fast food and the bag of chips and the things, it makes sense. However, I sit here in my position with FoodGrads and learning about the industry that a carrot has been processed, so it's like it ends up in a bag. So there's process and then there's levels of how that affects us from a health perspective. What is your thoughts there around, if you were to have a plant-based diet over meat, and certainly the ingredients that are used, is it healthier? Like, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I love the example that you used of the carrot because I have a lot of friends who are not in this space, and they'll say, oh, processed is always bad, and I tell them, well, when you're buying your cut pineapple in the store, like, that's also been processed. There's a process that goes on. You peeled it, you cut it, you've packaged it, you've shipped it, and they'll be like, no, that's not processed food. And I was like, well, that is processed food. So
Yeah.
I do kind of like that just distinction of, not all processed food is bad. Maybe our ultra processed Cheetos are not the best for us. And maybe I'll preface by saying I don't have much of a nutrition background. I think when we study food science and food engineering, we don't get that much into what goes on in our bodies after we ingest the food. It's more, up until the food comes to us. But I think there was a necessary need for us, or there was a need for us to kind of understand the individual contributions of each one of the ingredients before we can move to maybe a more whole ingredient approach. So, when I talked about developing your plant-based food and kind of assembling your fiber source, your protein source, and your fat source, I think there was a great benefit to the plant-based scientific community to understanding what was the individual contribution of each one of these components, so if you're choosing a specific fiber, a specific fat, how does that interact with that specific protein? And as we build the understanding of the interactions between these carbohydrates and these proteins and these fiber components, then I think we have more information to start moving towards using a whole ingredient. Because if you think of a chickpea, for instance, when you're extracting protein from it, you're separating, the fiber, the fat, and the protein, and ultimately you're putting it back together into this product that needs it all for us to have, the fatty mouthfeel and the fibrous structure and the protein content and the protein functionality. So I think we are moving into that direction. I think it's just part of a process of understanding how we create these products, how we process these products. I don't think they're all bad. I think some are better than others, just like the conventional meat products. But
common sense has to enter, and we have to use our own common sense a lot of the time.
yeah, for sure.
And when we talk about processing, I like people like the food should be healthy, but to your point, the hot Cheetos are probably not a good food source. I mean, I agree with the term food-like product or something. You can't even really call certain things food. So it makes me laugh. But then I like what you're saying, that there isn't even the fact that there's thought put into the individual contributions of each of the ingredient and how that what's that the health benefit based on the whole,
Right.
from the individual contribution. So and I do talk to so many food scientists over the years that say, it's interesting, I got into this because I care about what we're putting in our food. We're not there to put these evil things in food that that's just about saving money and making the consumer unwell, but filling the pockets of the company, the bank accounts of the companies. So I think that's one of the biggest pushes that we do as FoodGrads and CareersNOW, to say, if you care about what you're eating, then come into the industry and change things that you don't like, and influence things that you can from your position from within the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally support that. We have a lot of very interesting projects that we've just recently funded where, folks are trying to increase the protein in their products because they want, because we know the importance of eating that specific protein amount. And folks are, including the vitamins or the omegas that are not naturally present because they know how important that is. So we're getting there, and I think the industry is very aware that that's a consumer need and that's a consumer request. But it's certainly a process to make those inclusions or make those modifications and create a product that is still tasty, right? Because we won't buy it if it's not. And I think that always ends up in the number one category when people vote, what makes you buy your plant-based food products? It's always taste. So it's a bit of a process to move into the cleaner label, but yet have a product that's still going to be accepted by the consumer.
Yeah, well, especially I think as a consumer, mothers, like if you can sneak that better for you product into your kids' diet and they don't even really notice, then you're winning.
For sure.
In terms of some of the exciting new developments in plant-based foods, and what are you looking at right now? What are you working on? What have you seen from some of the companies that you're working with?
Yeah. So okay, this is great because we talked about challenges and it seemed super dark. So now we get into the
fun stuff.
happy findings of the industry. There's a lot out there. I guess I'll start by saying that. I'll start with one that I came in contact recently. So I was able to go to a plant protein conference this fall in the Netherlands. And there's a research center there that does a lot of exciting stuff, NIZO. And so I'll, also, if someone is interested and wants to read a lot, they also publish a lot of interesting work. And we took part in a sensory trial where they were biopurifying a hemp a hemp-based milk alternative. And so it was this really simple, 10-minute incubation at room temperature. And we tasted the before and after product, and it was amazing because the biopurification was able to just remove a lot of the off flavors and even change some of the mouthfeel of the drink. I haven't come across a lot of hemp-based products in Canada, but if you have, you know that it has a very earthy notes to it. So biopurification is an example of an exciting new technology, or new application of a technology in food, and where it will improve some of those flavor challenges or opportunities that I was talking about earlier. There's a lot of other work going on in the flavor space, even using fermentation to improve some of the flavor notes. So we're working on it. What else? I think I briefly mentioned this when we touched on sustainability, but the use of byproducts is something that really excites me. Like I said, sustainability is close to my heart, and obviously the work done with Second Harvest, I was even more aware of how much this is an issue. And I love that companies are thinking more and more about how to reduce our waste, which is step number one, is really reducing how much we waste, and then two, for the waste that we maybe really have to have, what do we do with it? So I guess I'll bring up fermentation again. We have an interesting project where they're using byproducts for precision fermentation, and some of that starch that comes out of this protein extraction product can be an input to another process and to another ingredient or to another product that will be super interesting. So the use of byproducts, the use of non-conventional or just kind of underutilized proteins. We're seeing, protein being extracted and being studied from ryegrass or from quinoa leaves, which, we don't normally use. We're talking about, rubisco a little bit more, and what's the functionality of those proteins that I don't think we considered extracting or considered working with before. So that's super interesting. And then maybe one other that I'll mention, there has been a lot of work on, understanding how processing impacts the functionality of a specific protein, or of a specific ingredient. And recently I've learned that there's some work going on in building tools that may use AI to kind of predict, what is going to be that functionality, or how is that ingredient going to perform depending on the process that was applied to it. So I think that is a really good example of where, AI, this tool that we're talking about so much and that using so much, I don't know if folks out there are using it already or not, but it will allow us to also advance in the industry and advancing these findings that we have and that we will make. So I could go on and on, but I'll leave some of those as just kind of food for thought.
Can you break down some of the technologies you just mentioned, the fermentation, some of the newer technologies, just to our viewers that might not be so familiar with what those terms mean?
Yeah. So you want me to go over them?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so a biopurification, it's similar to a fermentation, but it's mostly an incubation. You use different microorganisms like lactobacillus, like similar to what you'd use in yogurt, and they'll process the ingredient and will help reduce the off flavors. I can't know what type of microorganisms were used in that trial that we did, because I think they're trying to patent that work.
Right.
What else did I mention? Yeah, I talked about
You mentioned
byproducts,
fermentation.
precision fermentation. I can throw that in the chat for sure if that's handy. And well, functionality, it's kind of how your protein behaves. Is it soluble, is it not? Does it gel, does it not gel, at what temperatures does it gel? Does it foam? When we're talking about those products that like the barista alternatives, like the oat barista, we're studying the foamability of that protein, and does it foam well or not, because we need that product to foam, right, if we want that nice little layer of foam in our product. So yeah, I think
It's fascinating, and a lot I'm hearing of trial and error. You got have patience, and we can talk about that. I was going to say, towards the end, I would love to sort of give more advice to the students and grads that could be listening today, around skills and that kind of thing. But before we move off completely, what do you see in terms of plant-based food market, the products in the next 5 to 10 years? Are there things that are being talked about that, maybe when you're traveling to Europe or other countries that are working on that, perhaps Canada isn't quite there yet, but will maybe in the future?
Yeah. And there are a lot of great products out there already. I think I do expect to see many more and better options in the market. I think we're seeing a trend going towards some of the higher protein products. Um, you know, Maybe adding a little bit more protein into those vegan cheeses or those vegan milks that don't kind of quite match the quantity that we have in the conventional products. So that's one of the trends that I see. I see us having more of that. If not equal nutritional aspect, more protein in those products. We see a lot of products being done in the gluten-free space. I think that's a market that's also increasing, So again, focusing on proteins that's not the gluten for some of those meat alternatives, or improving some of the products out there that, even we're talking about high protein breads here and kind of using pulses instead or in addition to the traditional wheat that we use. So, I mean, that's another, kind of away from the meat alternatives, but still in that plant-based food space. I think we will, and we're trying to move towards the clean label. So like I said, using more whole ingredients, natural colors, and even fermented products that will give us that flavor profile. So um, I think it's a very exciting market. I think we'll see way more products, way more companies, and yeah,
Yeah.
I'm excited to see what's to come.
Um, through your own experience, what would be the top 3 soft skills as a food scientist? I mean, and you can combine your role as well, but what would you say are the top 3 skills that someone that might be looking or listening today is like, this might be a really cool career path for me to pursue? What would you say would be the top 3 soft skills they should focus on?
Yeah. Well, and I realize that I mostly talk about research and development. There's so many other things that you can do, within even the plant-based food space, but much more within the food industry. If you are wanting to go through that R&D path, I think creativity and problem solving is a great skill to have. You like you said, it is trial and error, and you do have to always be after the most current data, and the most current information, and kind of try to puzzle that when you're in the lab or you're in the pilot plant and trying to figure out what's going wrong, and why is this not working. And so I think problem solving is a great one to have, probably for all careers, but certainly when you're trying to kind of solve these big puzzles. um, what else? I think communication is always a good one. You're having to translate ideas to, your bigger group. You're having to translate ideas sometimes, the folks that are working with you on that machine. And obviously you're trying to take in all of the information that you're reading from scientific papers or from other folks that you're seeing that are doing the work. So I think communication is another one. And what else? Yeah.
I was going to say, communicating scientific terms and terminology and ideas to non-scientific
Yes.
people as well is a huge challenge, I would think.
Yes, and I struggle with that one, so I've got some work to do. But yes, I think that is also important, especially if you care about what you do, which I hope folks in the line do. You want to be able to translate what it is that you do in non-technical terms so that folks can understand, what really are you working on and how does that benefit the society, or so I think that's
Yeah.
also a great one.
What advice would you give to students and grads listening today, from your own personal experience, like how to find a job? I mean, that's one of the major complaints we get. I've done everything you've said, and I'm still not able to, get a job or get that interview. What's worked for you?
Yeah, and I can certainly identify. Obviously, kind of moving to Canada, you're trying to navigate a new job market on top of everything else that we're already
Yeah.
navigating when we're looking for jobs. Um, let's see. I think it's very I think it's very good when almost, passion meets profession and you are doing something that you really love, because when you're writing that motivational statement, and I know that people don't like motivational letters, I think they can really help you. You can you're writing down your story, and you're not trying to create an image or create a story as to why that company should hire you. You're actually telling them, hey, this is what I love and this is what I want to do. um,
Mm.
and they and if you love what you do, then you are going to be dedicated to that job, and I think that does come through. So maybe try to understand, how does that job kind of, what do you love about that job, or what do you love about the outcomes of what you do, and translate that into writing, if we're talking about pre-interview, and certainly that will come through when you do get an interview with that company. um, I think the other thing too is, I work remote, but that's rare for food science. You normally have to be located
Mm.
by the company that you're working at. um,
Mm-hmm.
so I think, if you are in school, maybe try to think about, what is it that you like to do. Do you want to work with ingredient processing or product, or um, even funding programs, which is what I do today? Because I think your geography, that may impact kind of your choice of geography. If you are around Toronto, there's a lot of manufacturing. So is that the path that you want to take? And maybe if you want to work with ingredient processors, kind of Toronto is not the place that will be, and so maybe a relocation will be necessary, or you're in the prairies already and that's kind of where you want to settle. um, I'm obviously, I've been everywhere, and I love
Mm.
moving and getting to know new places. I know that's not the case for everyone, and I appreciate folks that kind of want to stay put, but um, try to understand what is available around you and really study the job market, and within those options that you're willing to kind of take, decide which is the one that makes more sense for you. So
Mm.
yeah.
There's some thought that needs to go in for sure. I think everyone's different, and I like the fact that you hit the nail on the head. Even though it's food science, it can be approached in various ways. There's lots
Yeah.
of different facets. Um, Kind of brings me to the last question I'll ask you today. I know we're approaching the hour, so um, why do you love your job? Like, what's the number one thing that you'd say that you love about your job, and what are you excited about in 2025 that you'll be doing at your company?
Yeah. So I have to say, the thing that I love the most is when we're working with a company on a project, and I go to the store, and I go to whatever Whole Foods, Safeway, whatever supermarket I'm going into, and I'm walking down the aisle and I look at a product and I go, like, I know what this is. And and I've kind
Yeah.
of, I've taken, very, very little. I mean, the credits goes to them, of course, but it's kind of seeing your baby project that has been born. So I love seeing the products come to fruition and actually start to be commercialized, and hearing what people have to say and trying them myself.
Mm,
And that is one of the things I'm excited for in 2025. I think we see more and more companies that are moving from that kind of proof of concept stage or scaling up stage to that commercial level, and that's where we will start to see these products going to the market, and start receiving feedback, and working on those aspects that maybe are not so good or that can improve. So really excited for that, for what's to come. Yeah, I think that's
next
that's
year.
the biggest one.
Yeah, I hear that. That's awesome. I also like AI is something that literally everybody that I talk to these days is like interested to see how we're going to use this. This
Yeah.
no one's really. mastered it, and it doesn't matter what industry or what sector within food. But everyone's just kind of trying it and testing it out. And so far, I hear lots of great things. So it will be interesting to see how it might affect the plant-based space. Maybe we'll have you back on in a year or two, and you can tell us how that all evolved. But Lara, really appreciate your time today. We couldn't do these conversations, we couldn't inspire the next generation if it wasn't for individuals like you that were open to coming on to our mentorship sessions and talking about what you do and the company and companies that you've worked for. We love sharing your own career story as well. Everybody's story is different, and that's one of the main things that we really promote. There's not one size fits all. Everyone does it their own way, depending on their education and what interest. And I love this mostly about the industry, that you don't have to stay, and you can zig and zag and look where you are. And you probably didn't think you'd be working for Protein Industries Canada when you were at school, but look, here you are now. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Nicole. And yeah, I think there's so many skills that are transferable and that we don't realize. So focus on that. Like I said, I'm in the beginning of my career. So if anyone wants to connect with me and give me tips or have a chat about anything, I'm obviously open to that and appreciate the invitation. And I hope more folks get into the plant-based food industry because, like I said, there's lots of opportunities out there. So
it's amazing. Thank you again. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.